I'm very excited to introduce you to a dear friend of mine, Steve Davison. Steve is a psychoneuroimmunologist. So I believe that makes him a very fascinating clinician, to say the least. Steve's first degree was in immunology. Then he went on to obtain a degree in molecular biology, and then further to study a degree in chiropractic. So Steve, welcome to my show.
Well, thank you, Trishul. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. How are you?
I'm very good. I'm very good. How are you doing at the moment?
Yeah, not bad. I've just been out this morning and I've been sitting in the sun. Got a bit. I can see I'm a bit red, but it's all good.
Still looking
Vitamin D.
Still looking good. That's it. Well, Steve, let's get right into it. So first of all, I'm fascinated. You've studied all these degrees. What made you study all of this stuff?
Oh well, in the terms of immunology, I was looking for. I suppose I was looking for a direction to go. So this would have been about 17, 18. And I came across a magazine, which was a Scientific American magazine, which said, and I didn't usually go to the science magazines, actually. I'd normally go for the sports. But it just hit me, and it said Life, Death, and the Immune System. I always remember it. And that issue is still available. It's in the 90s somewhere. And I picked up this magazine, and it was all a Scientific American publication, all about the immune system. And I was on the train. I was in a railway station. So on the train back home, I read it from cover to cover, And at the end of the train journey, and it was about 35, 40 minutes, and I'd skimmed through all this information, and I thought, I've got to study this stuff. I've got to, I must go to uni to. And I didn't know if anyone did immunology, so I'd never heard of this subject on its own, And I did some research and ended up at King's College in London and studied immunology. It's brilliant, absolutely fascinating stuff.
And that led you on a journey. That was the start of this whole journey that you've gone on, which I've met you more towards the end of this journey, which has been amazing to see where you ended up and almost summarize all the years of learning and experience that you have. How did you get to where you are now then?
In terms of what I'm doing now?
Yeah.
Well, it was, I'd had a brush with, I'd finished my degree, and then my original plan was to do a PhD in molecular genetics up at Cambridge. And I was on a PhD program up there, and I realized that I wanted to study chiropractic. So a year in, I got enough data to write up for what they call an MPhil, Master of Philosophy. I'd worked very, very hard. And chiropractic,
one year, that's
in my life.
A lot. That's amazing. 1 year you did that in.
Yeah, 1 year I worked like
wow.
crazy. You had to, yeah, I did. I was in the lab pretty much night and day, really. But anyway, I had this interest in chiropractic, and because earlier in my life I had injured my back, and I'd seen a chiropractor, and it really helped me. And so I had a decision at that MPhil stage. I'd got the MPhil, and I thought, well, do I carry on in science, with my pipette, really sort of a gene jockey, as they used to call us, or do I make the switch to more, I guess you'd call clinical-based endeavors, And I was very, switched on by chiropractic at the time, and still am. And so I went for it and studied chiropractic, and then after that opened a chiropractic practice with my wife, and it went from there, really. And so my sort of dual loves is immunology and clinical medicine. How do you apply immunology, the academic side of immunology, let's say, to a clinical setting. So that occupies a lot of my thoughts and my time, really.
Well, I know the conversations we've been having in the last few weeks and months has led us to why I thought this would be a very powerful session to share with my audience. So, we've been talking about psychoneuroimmune responses in the body and how that works. And, I think you and I have come across this whole method of, yes, we've got chiropractic in the traditional sense of everyone knows the hands-on treatment. But if we go to the fundamental principles of what it's looking to achieve rather than the application of it, we're still in line with that. How have you found the combination of your lab experience, the theoretical knowledge that you've gained from pre-chiropractic to the practical application of your chiropractic knowledge in your business, and then where we've been now, which is really fascinating for me. If we could share that, that would be great.
Yeah, well, I think that so for example, if you're a medical doctor, every ailment looks like a drug, doesn't it? Because that's the way you've been trained. Whatever it is, whatever syndrome, disease, whatever it is, there's a drug at the end of it. And it's the old saying is if you've got a hammer in your hand, everything looks like a nail, doesn't it? Because you just want to keep. And I think that's true of chiropractic as well. You're trained to diagnose and be very, very interested in musculoskeletal syndromes, and which is great, and that's really, really cool. But a lot of the time, what occurred to me in practice as I went on, I realized that although people were coming to me for symptoms, of course, and I was treating them mechanistically, which is I was we call it adjusting. So I was adjusting them, I was manipulating their bones and so on, massage and all the rest of it. I came to a conclusion quite early on that most of this stuff that was coming to me was being generated by the way they were processing the world. And what would happen, of course, is if you really dug down deep at someone who has got a persistent musculoskeletal problem, assuming there's nothing underlying, in which case obviously they'll be referred out. Usually, if you dug deep enough and you knew where to go, you would find an emotional reason for that problem. A reason often, by the way, that they didn't know themselves. They didn't know it themselves.
Wow.
And so once you mine that, or once I started to mine that, I realized that if I then implemented conventional treatment, then it would resolve very, very quickly. So that was a big realization for me. And then I suppose in a way I thought quite arrogantly, I thought I was alone in this thought. You know what I mean? I thought, well, goodness me, this is just me. But reading that, when I started to read around, I remembered, by the way, psychoneuroimmunology. When I studied immunology, psycho, which is the brain, neuro, so the way the brain connects with the body is through the nerves. So psycho, brain, neuro is nervous system, immunology, which means basically the way you think influences your immune system, your immune response. And that's, when I first studied immunology, this was out on the side. You know what I mean? It was a little bit left field. But now, absolutely not. This is mainstream center science. We absolutely know for sure that the way you think affects the immune system, it affects your endocrinology, it affects your physiology, and so on. So once I realized that a lot of this was the way my patients were processing the world, and I tied it up with psychoneuroimmunology, and then went and started to research other people who had made the same connection, then it became a very fascinating and exciting thing to explore, because potentially, and this is my belief all these years later, that every disease starts in the mind, usually in the subconscious. We've buried many years before. And that's a bold statement. I cannot prove it. There's a lot of circumstantial evidence to point that way. There's a lot of research going on around that, although much of it not very well funded, because of course that sort of research doesn't ultimately give you a drug at the end. And that's the biggest problem that we have, is unless you're recommending a drug that one can sell, there's no there's very little funds for research. But anyway, you can be sure that so much of the things that ail us in this world, in terms of mental and physical stress, come from the subconscious, the unconscious mind. So my whole raison d'etre now really is to uncover protocols, which is what I do a lot of, that get to that, resolve that buried emotional issue. And once we get there, then whatever is ailing that person has the best chance of healing, whether it's a musculoskeletal syndrome or indeed anything else.
So how can people like me, people like you and me, who know how powerful these protocols are, when I've used them on people and they've been used to their normal traditional physical adjustment. But when I've done it in this virtual space, they've gone, you know what, Trishul? Yeah, it feels like you physically have adjusted me, and it was a positive response because they were having all this trouble. How can people like you and me get that message out, get people to understand, the works that you've kind of guided me to look at, which is, Dr. John Isano, his kind of work, which is all about this sort of stuff as well. How can we get that application of that out? Because it's so powerful, it's so useful. People need this. Even people who don't realize they need it. How can we, what would you like to see happen?
Oh, goodness me. Well, that is a very good question. I think that until I think it's happening. I think we're going against. So, for example, if you go, we're chiropractors, right? We train as chiropractors. Now, in the early days of chiropractic, this was a brand new paradigm. The fact that you went and got your bones sort of adjusted was very, very often very difficult. And even sometimes in this country, in the UK, it's difficult for people to, what are you going to do? You're not going to, what's that? You're going to crack it. All these conversations. So what you're looking at is a paradigm shift, I think. And the only way a paradigm shift gets changed is if, I guess, you have charismatic leaders who can articulate what the shift is and why we're going there. And number two, if the message keeps getting put out there without trying to dilute it. I think sometimes you've got to use metaphors and you've got to talk to people in the way that they understand. And by the way, a lot of people are in denial about what's going on in, the subconscious mind and stuff that we've buried. And some people are not. Some people go, oh yeah, mate, I tell you, I'm, God, if you went down to my basement, in my mind, you'd find all sorts of skeletons. So some people are like that. Other people are like, nothing wrong with me. That one, So I think that because it's a paradigm shift, all that we can do is keep offering the connections, the scientific evidence. You mentioned John Sarno, who's now no longer with us. He finally died, I think he was about 93, 94. He was a great savior for me when all this stuff was going on, when I was making all these sort of connections. I came across his work. He worked at the New York Medical Center for many, many years. And originally he was in accident and emergency, or ER, is what they call it over there. And then they transferred into like musculoskeletal medicine. And so a lot of his work was not in the beginning because he was a trained doctor. He realized he wasn't getting the results that he should have been getting. And it was frustrating for him. And then he made the connection that a lot of these things was psychoneuro in nature. And in his world, because he had theorized that the mind was creating syndromes, in this case musculoskeletal syndromes, sciatica, back pain, neck pain, headaches, fibromyalgia, and all the rest of it. The brain was creating these things to distract the person from the underlying emotional issue that was so painful that if it came to the surface, it would threaten that person's equilibrium. And so what we realized with the brain is not there to make you successful. It's there to keep you alive. So that goes back to in evolution. Its only function really, its main function, if you like, is to keep you safe, not to keep you successful or have your dreams come true, nothing like that. And so if it deems that there is a danger from the subconscious of an emotion overwhelming the person, and perhaps that person exploding with anger or crying or acting in a way that was not socially conventional, because that's very, very important for our brains, particularly the neocortex, because it's very, very mindful of social norms, politeness, morality, civility, and all of these things that we tie into polite society. It's very, very mindful of that. Well, of course, the subconscious and the unconscious mind and the sort of the young brain, the so-called lizard brain, it doesn't care about any of those things. And so you've got this tension between the neocortex and the lizard brain, where the lizard brain wants to explode and the neocortex won't allow it. And so you've got this push and pull. And so what we tend to do as human beings is we'll suppress a lot of emotion that we've had. And when that is detected, often that it's going to overwhelm us, the body, this is Sarno, the body then will distract us with a pain syndrome or an illness. And he has lots of theories about why that is. But he found, I mean, he's got thousands and thousands of case studies about this. And so when I found him and his work, it was a revelation to me. It's like, what? Someone else.
I felt the same way. It was literally when you recommended his works, and I was reading through it, it was like a key to unlock this whole universe. And I say that, that's a profound statement. A universe, it literally,
yes,
that agree. Combined with, just you talking about this paradigm shift is just making me think about even the works of fellow chiropractors like Joe Dispenza. People like him have been working in this kind of work for some time, with his own experience of his injury he had. And even people that we all know, world famous people like Deepak Chopra, who comes from a medical background as well. Things like that. It just amazes me that it's not mainstream enough yet. Still, even though you say it is mainstream, still, I think it's like, wow, people still don't quite fully get it. They it's not this woohoo, it's just in your head. It's like I say, it's actual science. It's black and white, and the results are something else, really.
Yeah, and I think you make a good point. This whole business about there's a bad rap around the idea that it's all in your head. Do you know what I mean? And that goes back years. Oh, it's in his head. Everything's in your head. That's the only way you can process the world. The only way your nervous system, which controls everything, can make any type of decisions is because of the way you process it. And you'll process something. So something will happen and your brain will process it. Whatever, even the most menial, stupid thing to a big thing in your life. It happens, the brain processes it and gives it meaning. And the meaning it gives it is according to the personality that you have. So the personality, if you like, is almost like a strobe that comes down in front of a light. So, or a filter, let's call it a filter, maybe is a better example. So as the filter comes down over a light source, you'll get different patterns, won't you, projected, according to what filter you use. Mm-hmm. Well, so it is with the personality. So the personality is the filter the brain uses to give whatever it is that's happened meaning. What does that mean for me? And so you get two different people that will have the same experience, the same thing will happen to them, but because of the filter they're using, they'll come up with a different meaning. Now, and this is where it does get interesting, because the meaning that you give it then will be in neurological form, and the only form that the nervous system can use is electron communication. So it's electricity. That's what's going on up here. So the way nerves connect with each other is just like wires in your home. They're just electrons moving along a piece of myelin, So, okay, I've given it meaning. That turns into a signal. And then the signal in the body, this is where the neurology and the physiology intersect. The physiology has to respond to the neurology. And the way it responds is through peptides, is through proteins. So it starts to make proteins in accordance, with the meaning that we gave that event. So for example, if we decided that this event is extremely stressful, then the physiology, the neurology will take this is a stressful signal, we'll start making stress hormones, cortisol, whatever. These are peptides. And we'll start up-regulating some genes, down-regulating other genes. There's a whole cascade of physiological, at the molecular level, physiological happenings going on, just because we gave an event a particular meaning. And so to say thoughts are things is absolutely scientifically sound. Whereas years ago, it was just considered, thoughts were not things. You know what I mean? They were not things. Mm. And that thinking has gone on so long that we still, people still think that today, that thoughts are not things. Oh, what you're saying is in my head. That's the other thing. You're saying it's in my head. Everything's in your head. Get over it. Everything is in your head. So, yes. And so one of the work that I'm interested in is, how do we decharge emotions or here's what sense this is Sano's what Sano realizes. As soon as you get something from the subconscious or the unconscious and you bring it, because you imagine an iceberg. Mm-hmm. So this is what we're aware of. This is our and this is the sea here. We can see the iceberg on the sea. That's what you see. That's what we're aware of. That's, we can interact with our surroundings. I'm aware of you. I'm aware that I'm talking and so on. And just under that is a preconscious level of the brain. And that's thoughts that we're not quite aware of, but we can bring them in if we want to, like almost like an actor going into the wings and bringing on another character. We can come and we can do that. And then you've got the unconscious, which is the part of the iceberg that is completely under the sea. And these are things that are there, and we have absolutely no idea that they are there in the unconscious. But the stuff in the unconscious is often, well, not often, it is driving our actions in the real world, and we don't even know it. So the work that interests me is twofold. One is dragging the repressed stuff from the unconscious into the conscious. As soon as you do that, you decharge it, and I don't quite know why that is. John Sarno found the same thing. As soon as people realize that their musculoskeletal syndrome was just their body's way of distracting them from unhelpful emotions like rage and anger and grief and so on. Once they accepted that and their conscious mind looked at it, brought it out to the light of day and said, oh yeah, the syndrome started to go away. So there is something about bringing it up from the basement, if you like, into the living room. I'm mixing metaphors here, but you know what I mean. Mm-hmm. There's something about that is very, very relieving and decharges a lot of the stress. That's number one. And number two is how can we consistently change the filter? Remember I said the personality is the filter that gives it meaning. And I think it's Joe Dispenza. You mentioned Joe Dispenza. I think he's said in the past that your personality will dictate your reality. And I absolutely agree with that. And so a lot of my work also, I'm very interested in Carl Jung's 12 archetypes, because I believe that each and every one of us are channeling, if you like, or using one of those archetypes most of the time. And the reason we choose a particular archetype, almost in the way that some people wear clothes because of their body shape, I think we choose a particular archetype as our personality because of our emotional profile. It fits quite well with all the stuff that's in the basement and the tension that's going on with the neocortex. I think once you change that relationship and you change the emotional profile, I think that the person then is freer to channel a different personality type. Carl Jung identified 12 main archetypes, and I think we're all channeling most of the time one of those.
Now, see, if I was someone who's just listening to this, who has no scientific background, and I'm listening to us speak and thinking, well, these guys all sound very clever. It's all well and good. It all makes sense. But so what? How is it useful for me? Who needs to, what can you help with? Who needs to see you guys for this sort of thing? How effective is it? All that kind of stuff. So what? I guess is what they're kind of thinking. Yeah, that's great. So what?
Well, goodness me, that is a very broad question. Well, it really goes down two pathways. One pathway is the physical manifestation of what's going on in the brain and how you're processing events and how those events relate to your unconscious. And that might sound a little bit goopy, but just bear with me. So how you process gives it meaning, and you may be experiencing physical symptoms. I don't care what it is, whether it's pain, whether it's a chronic disease, whatever it is. Then you should very, very seriously consider. I mean, John Sarno said that you can't get to the bottom of a problem that's the core of which is in the brain, which they all are, with a treatment that doesn't go there, i.e. a treatment that deals with just the symptom, right? So in this case, I've got neck pain. So the neck pain, fine, I can treat that. But if I don't get to where it's coming from, it will reinvent itself somewhere else in the body. So if you've got any physical symptoms, not just musculoskeletal, it could be reflux, it could be fibromyalgia, it could be IBS, it could be, to be honest, I would give anything a go with this. And so if you've got that, or you know someone who has those conditions, then you should explore the psychoneurobiology component to the disease. That's the one thing. That's actually physical. And then there's the other path, which is I call it the success pathway. And the success pathway is all to do with wanting to get to where you want to go. Now, there's two in life. There's two ways to get to where you want to go. The first one is, or there's two reasons that people don't get to where they want to go, in my opinion. The first reason is they lack strategy. And the second reason is if they've got the strategy, and sometimes they don't have the strategy, the second reason is mindset. It's always mindset. And it's how you're processing. I'm here, I want to go there, I've got these things. So I'm here, I want to go here, I've got these things between me and wherever I want to go. So I want to sort of do this. A big component of whether I do it is mindset. And now mindset, by the way, in my opinion, is governed by all of the stuff that I've just said. It's brought you to a place in your life where you have got certain opinions about certain things. And those opinions, those meanings that you're giving to certain things lead to neurology, lead to chemicals, lead to feeling, lead to physiology. And so you keep coming stuck, because it turns out that most of us think the same thoughts over and over. So 80% of the thoughts you thought today, you thought yesterday, the day before, the week before, and so you keep repeating a pattern. So if you're lacking success, I would also explore the psychoneurobiology, which is impacted in that is how you're processing the world and how you're giving things meaning. And I guarantee you, you're giving things meaning because of stuff that is buried in your unconscious. And so I would say to anyone who is looking to minimize physical manifestations, pain and so on, and someone who's looking for more success in their life, to explore the psychoneurobiological connection. And I would obviously recommend the work that I do, and you do, Trishul, which is we call it the New Truth Protocol, which gets to this connection. Now, the New Truth Protocol is something that will give you so much relief in your life in all sorts of areas. But if you're looking to reduce illness and you're looking for more success, then you have to, in my humble opinion, and from my not only clinical experience, but also experience working with entrepreneurs, because that's what I'm doing a lot of the time now, people who want to get on in life. If you crush the mindset thing, people just take massive leaps. So they used to say it's all in the mind, and that used to be a derogatory term, like, oh, it's all in the mind. But the fact of the matter is they were right. Excuse me, everything's in the mind. But if you get it, and we're never going to be perfect, but if you get your mind and your body in sync via the neurology, goodness me, you'll see things take off.
Wow. I mean, I want to end on that note, because that was amazing and mind opening on so many levels. Steve, look, you're always so generous with your time. So on behalf of my audience, thank you so much for being so giving today in both your time and expertise. And I know I really appreciate it, and you've added so much value. So thank you so much.
No problem, Trishul. Take care.
You too.